Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to the kick-off event, which of course marks the start of the 2023 Global Forum for Food and Agriculture here in Berlin. It is hosted by the German Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture in cooperation with the Berlin Senate and Messe Berlin. My name is Monica Jones. I'm a freelance journalist, conference moderator, and business anchor at German international broadcaster DW. My great pleasure to be here with you this afternoon to guide you through the program, which is short, but I can assure you jam-packed when it comes to content. And at this point, of course, also a very warm welcome to our viewers online. Maybe this camera or that camera, but you're very much welcome too. Let me just briefly start by giving you a little bit of background information on the Global Forum for Food and Agriculture, in short, GFFA. It was established in 2009, and it has since taken place every year in Berlin, always to coincide with the start of the International Green Week, which kicks off this evening. And the GFFA brings together international experts on food and agriculture, representing the fields of politics, academia, business, civil society, and it's about, of course, to give you a platform to exchange ideas on how to enable and balance global food security with environmental issues. That is certainly the focus of this year's GFFA. And unfortunately, you probably agree these days, this aim seems light years away. We're faced with what one could dub a perfect storm. We live in times of multiple crises, and it's very difficult to pinpoint towards one crisis and say, this is the biggest challenge, and if we know how to tackle that and overcome that, then we can actually meet one of the very ambitious Sustainable Development Goals which were set out by the international community with the 2030 agenda, namely ending global hunger. Instead, and it's now 2023, with just 7 years to go until 2030, the world is currently facing the worst food crisis since the Second World War. In tandem, if you like, with our conference, there's currently also going on the World Economic Forum in Davos. And just ahead of the Davos Forum, the Global Risk Report warned that we're faced with, quote, the first step backwards in human development in decades. How can we counter this development? Thing is that despite all the prophecies of gloom that we read in newspapers, that we watch on the television, that we sometimes even come up with ourselves in our own thoughts, there seems to be an obvious answer. We can counter it by working together. And that's what this forum is about, and hence the motto, Food Systems Transformation, a worldwide response to multiple crises. So over the next 2 days, roughly, stakeholders will discuss this topic based on 4 guiding questions, namely, how can we create crisis food systems, or crisis-proof food systems? How can we create climate-friendly food systems? How can we preserve biological diversity? And how can we improve collaboration for sustainable global food systems? There will be expert and high-level panels focusing on the issue. There will be practical examples as well. Perhaps you've seen them already when you came in on successful transformation. They'll be presented at the Innovation Forum and Lounge. Tomorrow afternoon, there's also a science slam that's going to tackle this year's main theme, main topic, and you and also our online viewers, of course, you can be part of a jury and vote for the best presentation that will be awarded. And finally, the Berlin Agriculture Ministers' Conference will conclude the GFFA on Saturday. The first discussion on the topic will take place very shortly here, in just a few minutes, when we will welcome the African Union Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy and Sustainable Environment, the US World Wildlife Fund's Senior Vice President of Market Transformation, the Secretary General of the Asian Farmers Association for Sustainable Rural Development, and the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food. So that's something I certainly look forward to having all them on the stage. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me just be very quickly again the voice of doom and gloom, just to bring us back to what we want to tackle here. So we're talking about an imminent climate emergency. We're talking about daily loss of vital biodiversity, also for agriculture. We're talking about wars, we're talking about pandemics, and then, of course, the highest number of global hunger since World War II. Despite all our efforts, and I know everybody here in the room is working very hard to solve the problems, to recognize them and to tackle the issues, and basically trying to do what it takes in order to meet the 2030 SDGs, including and especially the one that is about ending global hunger. But it seems that we have to change tactics somehow. Something is not working out. So how can we bring about a comprehensive transformation of global food systems? That's the big question. And that's a question that I would now like to discuss with a great panel. And I'm going to take a seat already, because that seat is taken and the others are free for my panelists. I'm going to introduce them to you in more detail once they're up here, but for now, please give a very warm welcome to the African Union Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy and Sustainable Environment, Josefa Sacco. Please give a warm welcome to the Senior Vice President, Markets at World Wildlife Fund, United States of America, Jason Clay. A very warm welcome also to the Secretary General of the Asian Farmers Association for Sustainable Rural Development, Estrella Esther Penunia. And last but not least, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, Michael Fakhri. So very good to have all of you here, and you may take a seat now. You may take a seat, and now let me just briefly say a little bit more about each of you, so that everybody is in the loop who we're dealing with. Starting with you, Josefa Sacco, who is a leading African agronomist, previously special advisor to two ministers in Angola, namely the Minister of Environment responsible for climate change and the Minister of Agriculture in charge of food security and poverty reduction. It goes without saying that each biography would last as long as the entire time for the panel, so I have to just pick certain highlights. But I think it's worth mentioning that among the many accolades and awards that she received for her work, she was named one of the 100 most influential people in climate policy in 2019, and that same year she was also awarded the Prix de la Fondation on the occasion of the Grand Montana African Women's Forum for her efforts to empower rural women. Wanted to share that with everybody, Josefa Sacco, so brilliant to have you here. Same goes, of course, for Jason Clay, who, and as with, this is a global forum for food and agriculture, happens to, he ran a farm, a family farm. He worked at the United States Department of Agriculture. He taught at Harvard and Yale, spent 15 years working with indigenous and displaced people. At the World Wildlife Fund, he launched programs on aquaculture, agriculture, livestock and market transformation. He's a leader within the WWF and the NGO community more broadly on identifying global trends and issues, as well as supply chain management, certainly also a topic that we'll get into. He's currently leading a 2-year proof of concept to explore what is called Codex Planetarius, which is a set of minimum global standards that reduce the key impacts of producing globally traded food. Also something that we hopefully can elaborate on, Jason. Esther Penunia as I mentioned, Secretary General of the Asian Farmers Association for Sustainable Rural Development, in short AFA, and that is a regional farmers alliance that offers policy information and dialogues with decision makers as support, as well as technical support for its 13 million members, mostly small-scale farmers in 16 Asian countries. The AFA believes that investments in empowering farmers' organizations and in strengthening their cooperatives are investments in unleashing the potential of millions of family farmers in the work of ending hunger and poverty in the world. And if I just may add, you and your husband, if that is still correct, you're currently working in partnership with a farming family in developing a 2-hectare upland farm through sustainable, integrated, diversified, and organic practices. So that's also some best practice that you may share with us later on. And last but not least, we have Michael Fakhri. And Michael actually wrote me an email before this event and said, well, if I was to introduce myself, this is what I would say, and I'm just stealing that straight away. So he's an independent UN expert who acts as the eyes, ears, and good conscience for the UN system on all matters regarding hunger, malnutrition, and famine from a human rights perspective. He reports directly to the UN Human Rights Council and General Assembly. He's an active member of the UN Committee on World Food Security, and he was recently invited to brief the Security Council. And I wonder what you told them, Michael. Now, just about your mandate, which of course is the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, that was created to address the need for an integrated and coordinated approach to promoting and protecting people's right to food. Something that I would also like to go deeper into about the exact definition, because I'm not sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to that. But we have 60 minutes. Let's get started with an opening round. Opening round meaning I give you one theme, one overall question, just to figure out where you're all individually coming from on that particular topic. So the right to adequate food is a basic human right. Ending hunger and malnutrition by 2030 is also an explicit goal of the Agenda 2030. Given the multiple crises that we've heard about, the crises that we're facing, from your perspectives, what kind of transformation is needed to get there? And I ended with you, Michael, so why don't you start?
Thank you, Monica, and thank you, everyone. I think the right to food has been increasingly recognized in international forums over the last year or so. You see this in the General Assembly, you see this in the UN Committee on World Food Security, the CFS, the Security Council, the G7, the UN Conference on Trade and Development. What needs to happen now is not just recognition, but it's time to commit to putting the right to food into action. And what this means, this can happen nationally and internationally. Nationally, over 110 countries after the UN Food Systems Summit developed national pathways to transition their food systems. These pathways can be converted into right-to-food action plans. You can work with any number of UN organizations, whether they're based in Rome or Geneva or working with my team. But the right to food has clear standards, clear obligations, and decades of work. So countries can take the right to food and put their national food pathways into action. Internationally, what needs to happen to deal with the food crisis, and I should say, the way we deal with the food crisis is how we're going to transform our food systems for decades to come. Internationally, what is still missing is an internationally coordinated plan on how to cooperate. We still have countries working either bilaterally or regionally. This can happen through the CFS. And I think this is an important year for that to happen. I recognize there are structural challenges for countries. There's a debt crisis, and of course the trade regime has been stuck for over 2 decades. But in my report to the General Assembly, I outline how we can work despite these structural challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Lots to follow up on. Esther, what do you think it takes for that transformation to happen?
Yes, I really like the word transformation because it connotes that there is something bad that happened and that we want it to change. No? And what is that something bad? For us, it's always very good to analyze what is our food system now. And the current food system for us is really broken because there is so much inequities, there is so much concentration of power in the hands of a few. And it has neglected and left behind the millions of family farmers, especially small-scale farmers, who dominate family farming in the world. Okay? So our statistics have said that 828 million people are hungry, and 51% of them alone are in Asia-Pacific. So if we want transformation, we would really want it to be not business as usual, to veer away from this. And so in our consultations with family farmers in Asia-Pacific, as well as with farmers' organizations all over the world, that these discussions had transpired during the Food System Summit, we see several shifts that need to happen to transform. First basic is the promotion of the rights of people, especially farmers, producers, indigenous peoples, forest dwellers, over the lands, the waters, the forests, and the seeds. No? Maybe through many secure tenurial instruments like certificates of land ownership awards, or community-based forest management, or social forestry. We see also basic, the promotion of agroecology and regenerative agriculture, because these kinds of systems, like integrated, diversified, organic farming, this puts biodiversity, mainstreams biodiversity, this puts farmers at the heart and at the center of innovation and technology. And then we see as also basic in the transformation the work of increasing the market power of farmers, because currently farmers are mere price takers. But if we strengthen the agency of farmers, especially through our organizations and cooperatives, we then have the power, because of our numbers, because of our capacities, to be equal partners with governments. So we see the basic of shifting the power to those who are left behind right now, the farmers, the producers, the indigenous peoples, the forest dwellers, the herders and pastoralists, and see them as solution providers, see them as your partners in development and in ending hunger and poverty. Because when we are organized, when we are empowered, we can do a lot more for us, for a healthy people and a healthy planet.
Thank you. Thank you, Esther. Jason, your thoughts?
So we heard about the perfect storm, about climate and biodiversity, food, price crises, and war. But I would suggest that this isn't the perfect storm. I would suggest this is the coming norm. I think these kinds of variables are going to become much more common, especially if we look at the prediction that between 1 and 1.5 billion people are going to be displaced within 25 years. We've already got close to 200 million, at least 150, 200 million people that are refugees or displaced internally. But we're going to have 1 in 8 people displaced within 25 years. What does that mean for farming if half of them are actually farmers, which is globally probably what the average is going to be? This kind of situation is setting us up for turbulent times. How we respond to those crises are going to be important. So what are we doing now? There is no silver bullet. We've got a lot of people working on a lot of things. It would fall down into categories of increasing productivity, soil and plants and animals, increasing efficiency, reducing water use, reducing fertilizer, pesticides, etc., reducing food loss and waste, which is now about 40% estimates globally. But we're seeing that with climate change, we have pre-harvest loss, which may already be 10%. If you start adding it up from around the world, nobody's talking about pre-harvest loss. How does this affect surpluses? How does this affect famines? We need to understand that better. And we need to focus on the shift consumption, and people are working on that. But I would argue that all of these things are incremental. None of them are transformational. Within 20 years, they may double production. In fact, that's what the estimates are they're going to need to do. But if we're going to be transformational, we need to shrink how much land we're using, not just maintain it, and certainly not expand food production. So how do we do that? We retire degraded land. We retire marginal land. We rehabilitate with new technologies some of the land that used to be used for farming rather than expanding into new areas. We need to be more nimble because of climate change. Climate change is changing where crops can be grown. Farmers need to diversify to survive. With climate change, we're seeing crops move 100 miles north in the US every year. Think about what that means for global food systems. This is happening everywhere, but it's not being measured. And I think that's the next thing we need. We need better data. We need common metrics, common measurements. We don't even use the same LCAs to actually calculate greenhouse gas emissions. We're finding, we did research on 10 commodities. We're finding there are 3 to 5 production systems for each of those commodities. Within one production system, within a single production system for soy, or for corn, or for beef, you have a 10x difference between the better and the worst. If you look at 2 different production systems for the same crop, it could be 100x. We're basing all of our calculations on averages. If we started focusing on moving the bottom, this would have the biggest impact on the global food system. Don't focus on the best producers, focus on the worst producers. That's where the biggest impacts are, that's where the least production is. Help them get better or help them get into another crop or another life, doing other things that are productive, but not farming marginally. And then finally, we've got to look at, I guess, eliminating, internalizing externalities. Not just environmental, also social. I mean, every environmental indicator is going in the wrong direction, so, and food production is probably the single largest cause of that globally. Largest cause of biodiversity loss, largest cause of habitat loss. But it's also, if you want to look at it, food is probably, the global food system is probably the most inequitable system on the planet. 70% of malnutrition is in rural areas, 70% of stunting, 70% of poverty, with 15% of the people on the planet. Think about what that means. People who produce food are hungry. There's something wrong with the system. So we need to understand more about traceability and about transparency. We need to know where and how food is produced. And we need to know that not just moving from the farmer down to the end user, but where prices are created moving from the end user all the way up to the farmer. How much of what is paid for food actually gets to the producer?
Right.
How do we change that equation?
Right. Well, thanks, Jason, for tons of questions that probably last for the entire global forum on food and agriculture, but thank you so much for that input. And obviously, GFFA, from the African Union perspective, from your experience, what would you say? What kind of transformation is necessary to end global hunger by 2030? Is that at all possible? Or are we just talking here in an ideal world?
Thank you for giving me the floor. Good afternoon, every one of you, Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, distinguished participants, and I wish you also Happy New Year, prosperous Africa for us, Africa, and peace in the globally. So, and to me, it's very important, and I would like to thank the organizer for inviting African Union Commission. In my person, I'm the Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy, and Sustainable Environment. So I cover almost all the thematics, of food, food ecosystem. So what I would like to say that we in Africa, we are a region that we have 55 countries, and we are the most vulnerable on these shocks that we are facing. Even before COVID-19 pandemic, we have issues of conflict, terrorism, we have conflict of climate change that was already there. And really, it was hampering any progress in terms of feeding our population. Then we came with COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. this one exacerbated and exposed our vulnerability. Let me start from COVID-19 pandemic. Our continent has 38 net importer of foods. So we depend on other regions to feed ourselves. When we have all the ecosystem to be, to feed ourselves, to be the bread basket of Africans, because we have 60% of uncultivated arable land. Other regions might not have it. We have waters, we have lakes, we have all these facility, potentials, and we have the youngest population on the continent. That's a region that has all these. So at the African Union Commission, this department, they asked me, Commissioner, what is the way forward? So this crisis brought us more committed, because everywhere we go, every forum we go, today, food security is stable. I was with a minister that came to African Union last week, and we were talking about it. She came to visit African Union, and we talked about it. Before, when we talk to policymakers about agriculture, it's as if we're crazy, we're out of context. It's peace and security, but what are the root cause of peace and security? It's hunger, it's poverty, it's climate change. So those are the issues that we need to table it.
Absolutely.
And I will not say that we are happy with the war and the pandemic, because we lost lives. Many people died. But this is the time for my fellow African to change the narrative. To change the narrative. In 2014, our head of state brought a common policy to transform agriculture and food system. This is CADEP, the Malabo Declaration, 2014.
Das ist die Malawi-Deklaration von 2014.
We are nowhere, because usually through CADEP we have a compass we call CADEP PP with partners. All the partners work together and we evaluate. We make the evaluation because in the Malabo Declaration there are 7 commitments, and the last commitment is mutual accountability. Since I was elected in 2017, I started accelerating this biannual review report to see the status of our member states vis-a-vis, the 7 commitments, the progress, to track the progress.
And how do they do? How do they fare?
They don't fare because they commit themselves. But, it's a good exercise because today we see that more countries are participating in the statistics. And we are putting more, how do you call it, not matrices, more indicators. We have 43 indicators to track all these 7 commitments. So this is a very good thing. So now with the war and the pandemic, we have the reports coming from the World Bank, FAO, telling us 282 million people are undernourished. So there is a way, that's why we need to implement. So what is the way forward that we have to do? Is, like you said it rightly in your introduction, is to work, is the number 4 commitment of agenda of this edition, is to work closely, together, so that we can, through the multilateralism cooperation. This one is very important because we know the problem, we know the challenge, and we have the solution. What is the way forward? And the way forward, this week, from the 25th to 27th, the current president of the African Union is convening a summit on food sovereignty, because we need to produce and feed Africans, and we need to produce to the world. But we start seeing that people are really buying in all this CADEP Malabo Declaration, the African common position to the UN food system. We're the only region on the continent that brought an African common position with 43 game-changing on all these things that my colleagues, the panelists were saying, like irrigation, challenges we are having, lack of fertilizer, lack of seed, all these are in this. So the way forward is like in this meeting I came, I'm going to sign a memorandum of intent with the Federal Republic of Germany, which has been giving us a lot of support, you know, not only in my department, but we have a building, your minister was there, Foreign Affairs last week, we have a building that was offered, thank you very much, I take the opportunity, for peace and security. So when you come to our compound, the headquarters of African Union, there's a huge building where my colleague, the commissioner for now political affairs, peace and security, is working. Very huge, and we have a monument of all these people that are dying, all the army. So I say this is the way forward that we need to implement, like my colleagues say.
What I understand from what you're saying is also that those terrible crises can also be a chance because they force you to change. They force you into even thinking about a possible transformation. And doing that not alone, I think that is a no-brainer. That is something that you figure out very quickly, that you can't do it on your own. And I'm wondering, because if a big crisis is needed in order to trigger change, because we're creatures of habit, if things work fairly okay, then why change it? You know, if it ain't broke, why change it? Michael, you said at the start, before we came to the panel here, that this is the first time that somebody from the United Nations, the special rapporteur, is invited to this forum. And this is now the 15th time. I could read into that that is probably also a reaction to the crisis that we're facing, and the hope that the human right to food is something that possibly needs to be redefined or defined, that we have the kind of data, the same standard. So according to the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, they say the right to adequate food shall not be interpreted in a narrow or restrictive sense, which equates it with a minimum package of calories, proteins and other specific nutrients, so basically to ensure survival. Now, if that is not the definition, how do you define the right to adequate food? What does it entail? What are we looking at?
Yeah. Well, thank you, and I just want to thank again the Ministry of Food and the German Ministry of Food and Agriculture for inviting me. But the other reason I'm able to be here representing my mandate is the power of people. People define the right to food, and they redefine the right to food, and this is the moment. And so the right to food in the most basic terms means everyone at all times has the right to food. That means that food must be available, it must be there. It must be accessible. People must be able to get to food, whether it's through fair and stable markets or access to land and water. And food must be adequate food. It must be good food, nutritious, culturally appropriate. Food makes us stronger, but food defines who we are. It's how we define community. It's how we take care of each other. So that's sort of in the most basic terms, but every era, we have to redefine food. What's been frustrating is that a small number of powerful countries are blocking the ability to coordinate and cooperate internationally. Every crisis in the past, we've redefined the right to food multilaterally, and we have yet to do that today. But to get more specific, what it means in terms of policy terms, it's a transition, as we're all saying. Well, what's the problem? Everyone will define the problem. Why don't we agree on the problem? And I'll just build on what Esther said. Too few people, companies, individuals, and countries, a small number have too much power in our food system. We must put the power back into the hands of the people that feed us, the workers, the farmers, the pastoralists, the fishers, the families, local governments. So that's the problem. Mm-hmm. And we must transition to what? To agroecology. There's lots of terms that we hear. Sustainable, we all must agree, is too vague. It's too diffuse. Okay, sustainable, bravo. Okay, we decided on that 20 years ago. What's that mean to now? So now you have lots of other terms. Regenerative, nature-based solution is my least favorite one. It's the most vague. Regenerative is important, but why do I say agroecology? It's the only concept that is based on science, that's based on social movements, that also recognizes this important factor. It is both about knowledge and human rights. You cannot separate how we treat the land and water from how we treat people. It goes hand in hand. Agroecology is the only concept that has this specific meaning in law, in policy, in terms of indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, and the scientific community is ready to back it up, and UN organizations are ready to support it. So how do we do that? It's three things: a just transition for workers, strong land rights and genuine agrarian reform, and hold corporations accountable. The plan is there. It's time to do it.
Jason, Esther. Esther, I saw you nodding several times, like you agree with Michael 100%, and I was wondering if the term agroecology is maybe the silver bullet, maybe not the silver bullet, Jason, but when you were mentioning earlier about, we all have these sort of different data, different standards. Could that solve the problem, perhaps globally, because we're looking for a global response? Perhaps you, Jason, first. Is that term alone, and if we fill it with life, could that be the solution?
I think it's all going to come down to what it means in every geography and in every political context. And so what we have found, if you look at this from an environmental perspective, is that if it comes down to a choice of feeding a child or cutting a tree, the tree is going to be cut every time. And so we have to come up with options that avoid that distinction. And we've got to come up with ways to wherever we are on the planet, do better, improve soil health. These fall under the rubric of agroecology. They fall under the rubric of regenerative agriculture, many of these different topics. I'm much less interested in the name than in the measurements. Can we show that we are actually improving over time? And can we keep on a continuous path? So we need to agree on what the metrics are. We can't focus on, 40 or 50 things. 6 or 8 on the environment is all we need. Habitat, biodiversity, water take, water use, greenhouse gas emissions.
And then actually implement it.
And then implement it and measure it. And every country doesn't have to have the same level of performance, but if we're all measuring the same way, we can begin to manage the planet as a planet, because that's where we are today. We've expanded. 70% of the loss of habitat and biodiversity is because of farming. We've got to get that under control. We can't just keep expanding. Where's planet B? We don't have one.
I think NASA is looking for it, but we haven't found it just yet. Esther, you mentioned it yourself about the importance of empowering farmers because they are crucial. And I just found some statistics about South Asia, obviously one of the world's regions most vulnerable to climate change impact. And it's estimates that show that 10 to 50%, so it's quite a stretch, but 10 to 50% of the region's crop production could be lost by the end of the century, which is not a good thought. How do we counter that?
We should not let it happen. And that's why transformation is very necessary. And at the farmer level, at the community level, we really push for agroecology, regenerative approaches, climate-resilient approaches done by family farmers, supported by various government, development partners, and NGOs. I think this is the way to do. We have had very top-down technologies in the past, starting with the Green Revolution. And this should not happen anymore. That's why we value agroecology, because agroecology puts a lot of emphasis in the knowledge and the innovation that farmers can make on the field. They are free and they are independent, and if they are supported, they can do much. In our farm, for example, when we practice, we tried to do water harvesting from our roof, okay? And then we tried to build ponds and then put fishes in the pond. And that cost a lot of investment savings from my money as secretary, as a worker in AFA. And then several months later, we found out that the fish, the catfish in the ponds, were eaten by what you call it? Like a lizard, a big lizard, no? A big lizard. So we had to innovate, no? By ourselves. How can we protect the fish from this big lizard that is eating the fishes? So these are things. We planted organic eggplants. Okay. At first, it was we were harvesting, but then fruit flies came and devastated our organic eggplants. So we had to think how to do organic pesticide. Okay? So these things, and so that's why agroecology, if we practice it, this brings a lot of dynamism in farmers, the innovation, the experimentation. And then if we are able to capture the learnings, then we can share to millions of farmers because we are there and farmers see what you are doing, and if you are doing right, they will follow you. So we hope that we could really practice and promote agroecology. There are already multi-stakeholder coalitions like Coalition on Agroecology, and we're happy that many countries are now into it. There are farmers' organizations and NGOs. If we are able to massively promote it, experiment on it, and then capture the lessons learned, I think we will do well, well for climate resilience.
It is learning by doing, but by those who are actually, first-hand experts, who are actually responsible and who know what they're doing. But it also seems to be somewhat time-consuming, and I wonder if we have the time to learn all the lessons and then spread it with everybody else who may adopt them or may prefer to do it their own way after all. And Josefa, you were mentioning also about, all the richest of the resources that the continent of Africa has. Lots of regions there, very rich in raw material, resources, young population. And of course, there are also a lot of smallhold farmers there also doing fantastic work, but struggling also with access to input. Irrigation, a lot of them depending on rain seasons because there is no artificial irrigation. What concrete measures do you think are necessary? Because there are aid organizations, NGOs, also government organizations. They're coming in, they offer training, they offer new technologies and equipment, but there always seems to be a gap between those who try to come up with help and good ideas, and then when they're gone, what then? I mean, it doesn't seem to be the sustainable solution. What are you doing? What's your approach there?
Our approach is that we have a lot of stakeholders involved on this in agriculture or food production. What we say at the African Union, like we are the continental, umbrella of these policies, is to work together and create synergy. Because, let me even start from the African Union Commission. When a global agenda comes, like now it's food security, all the departments want to be food security. When it's environment, everybody wants to do environment, hijacking people's mandate, you see. So what I say is good because like an issue of climate change, environment, is really cross-cutting. I cannot say that I'm a commissioner for environment, I have to do it alone. We have to look at all the sources. For instance, when you're talking about humanitarian issues, it's very, very crucial in Africa. So myself and my colleague from Peace and Security, we are, we work together in the approach or nexus between food security, climate change, humanitarian, people's, how do you call it, displaced peoples, internal displaced people, and peace. What is this nexus? So that we come with an integrated approach, and when we are pledging for funds to implement those actions, we are all on the same line. I think this is the way forward. These gaps exist, except we don't accept to work together. With partners, we are talking international cooperation. Within our own national or regional organization, we need to bring all these agendas together and go together. You know, we have to go hand in hand, like the DG of FAO used to say. We have to go hand in hand, because if you walk alone, isolated, you will not get the goal that we are going. Just the last one, like, you know, we are talking about food security, ending hunger. The global agenda tells us the target of the global agenda is by 2030, we should end hunger. So we took from that ending hunger in our own CADEP and the Agenda 2063 of the African Union to come with a very accelerated target, ending hunger in 2025. Are we there? We are not there. That's why it's good to work together.
Put yourself under pressure.
Access, and then people will see. Because the last report, biannual review report, the African Union presented to our head of state, only one country is on track for, that was last year, for 2025. 2025, now is just 2 years. Right. Are we on track? So that is traceability. That is evidence-based, you know, a type of analysis that we are doing as a policymaker. Right. We don't go to the field and go and do, I'm an agronomist, but I don't do that job anymore. Today is strategy, policy, and how the national development plans at the member states are aligning themselves with us. How are we aligning with the global agenda? Because we have our Agenda 2063, but we are also members of the global community, right, where we have to comply with the goals of Agenda 2030. So, and we work together with FAO, IFAD, WFP. We work together, and every year we have a meeting, we set a year working plan, and we are working together.
And then you monitor that. So, because otherwise it's setting plan after plan, you also keep track of it. You monitor it.
We have started for this year. Yeah. We are going to present another report on the progress. Mostly now with these 2 shocks, we are really accelerating, and we are getting a lot of investment. We got from the World Bank $3.4 billion for the Horn of Africa, which has a problem, and the Southern Africa because of the droughts. So we got $1.5 billion right, from ADB because of the Russia and Ukraine crisis. We developed, you know, together the 2 organizations, we developed the African Emergency Food Production Facility. And our member states are getting that money for us to build the 5 cereals that are lacking. Believe you me, in 8 years' time, we will export wheat elsewhere. I thank you.
In 8 years, we talk again. We catch up on that. But with all that strategy, I would like to put something to, especially you, Josvesa and Esther, but it's a question, first of all, to answer from Jason, because I looked up several websites and I found one quote. Our goal is to figure out how to produce more with less land, less water, less pollution, so we won't be the only species left living on this planet, which is great, and it's something that you touched upon also in your opening statement, Jason. Shrinking, I think you also said, you know, not expanding land use, but shrink it. And I'm wondering, when we on the one hand say that we have, unfortunately, a growing amount of people going hungry, we have the biggest crisis in that respect since the Second World War, and then on the other hand, we have a loss of a lot of biodiversity, as COP15 also figured out, and they came up with a deal which also impacts actually the use of land, because about 30% of that is supposed to be protected and not used so that biodiversity can thrive again. So we're already shrinking the amount of land that can be used. So how do we balance that? How can we, or what is necessary in order to shrink and produce more? We have 8 billion people on the planet right now. That sort of seems to be at odds. So Jason, perhaps you already have a great idea on that.
Well, it's going to get worse, okay? Because in 15 years, we're going to have 9 billion people, just in 15 years. So imagine what that means to a food system. I think that Esther actually demonstrated why we need to share information, why we need to use this incredible information system we've got to help producers, to help companies, to help governments share information much more quickly. Knowledge sharing. We can't afford to have a billion different learning curves producing food. That's just never going to work. They've got to learn faster and do it by regions, do it by associations, start, but build on it. We can't afford to have 15 or 20,000 companies, each on their own learning curve, because their lawyers say they can't talk to each other. That's nonsense. This is not about competition law. Sustainability is pre-competitive. We all need to work on it. They all need crops. They all buy from the same farmers on any given day. So let's figure out how to do this. And governments, they need to be sharing information as well. What works with regard to addressing climate change? How do you pivot subsidies to really start addressing new things? There's not going to be new money, so how do we use old money? How do we use stranded assets? These are areas where we can expand a lot. And the private sector can step up too. They know they have to buy food. It's not like it's a surprise every year they have to go out and buy things to make their products. Put in a long-term contract. Use 3, 5, 10, 15 years to give producers an asset that they can borrow money against. You don't have to fix the price. You can have a price-finding mechanism. But let producers have an asset so they can walk into a bank and borrow the money to make the investment, to make it go. And if we can bundle those long-term contracts together, can we begin to get some green funds that are 30 to 40 years that allow us to really make investments in doing this stuff? Because in this new norm, this kind of change is going to continue. We're not going to get away from it. So how can we set up systems that learn faster? How can we set up financial institutions that make money available for the right things? How can government programs not support the farming that is, but the farming that needs to be, that we need for the next generation?
Michael Wood.
In the spirit of diverse perspectives, I have a slightly different take. We're talking about using less land. I wonder if we need to discuss, what do we mean by land use? 80% of our biodiversity is protected by indigenous peoples. We already have the knowledge. We already know what to do. I think it's more a question of who are we going to ask? The knowledge is in the hands of the small farmers. So, if you farm correctly, if you use agroecology or whatever, food production will increase biodiversity. So if we give more people access to land who are using the land in a way that is increasing biodiversity, if we're improving people's fishing rights and hunting rights and foraging rights, because for too long, people will say we need to conserve more land, has been a way to push people off of their traditional territories. We always are using all of the land. So rather than talking about more or less for farming or for food production, I think we should talk about better land use more broadly.
Right. You may. And just briefly, Esther, in that context, please.
I would like to add to what Michael said. Indeed, we should talk about land use, rather than just less land, okay? Because in our experience in Asia, so many lands are being converted, irrigated lands, converted to subdivisions. So it reduces our ability to produce food. And also, if we practice climate-resilient agroecological approaches, production can be increased because if we practice diversity in our crops. Also, we should, there are also technologies for less land. Like, for example, our Lao farmer can produce sweet potato by putting one rubber tire after another in one piece of land. So these are kind of technologies. And of course, we should not only talk about production. We could also talk about processing, how to reduce food waste. So there have been studies, like for example, milling rice, the white one, you take out the vitamins and the minerals, but if you relearn how to eat brown rice, you have the vitamins, the minerals, and you have less wastage in rice processing. Agroecology also practices recycling, so you have the nutrients, you don't need to buy so much for external inputs. And then we also talk about distribution and marketing. Where do we distribute it? Just to the cities, or maybe to the local markets, to where people need it, to where the poor farmers are. So that's why that's the beauty, I think, of the food system. We don't talk about just one thing. We talk about production, processing, consumption, marketing, and and take it as in a very holistic approach. And this we can do if we really think of food systems that it has to be sustainable and resilient and healthy and just and empowering. If we have these principles, then so many things will come to place, I think.
Esther, when I listen to you, I suddenly believe that we can end hunger by 2030. Sounds very encouraging. But listening to all of you, obviously we need people who actually want to be farmers. I mean, some people are born into it, maybe have no alternative. Are they in it with their heart and really doing their best work? I don't know. Others choose to be farmers. And I wonder what sort of people they could be. And I know that we do have some young farmers here with us in the room. Just a show of hands, because I think you're mostly seated over there so that we know. Okay, so here we have a lot of young farmers. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk to you. You can show your hand. I'm not going to ask you a question. You're safe. Okay, so you're all over there. So thank you for being here, and thank you for the great work that you're doing. Much appreciated. And you are safe because we have one young farmer who volunteered to talk to us. And I'm going to meet her now, and I'll probably make a complete blunder of her name. Apologies for that already. And we switch so that we can see you better than me. You're more important. So I'm trying my very best. You are Ketevan Kotsotsashvili, more or less, from Georgia. Yes. Can I say how old you are? Is that okay?
26. Yeah.
26. So you're one of the young... You can give her a round of applause. It's very brave. Very brave of her.
Thank you.
So I'm sure you've been following the conversation. I was just mentioning what kind of people do facing all these crises decide now to be farmers. So I'm very curious to your intervention now to hear that.
First of all, I'm very pleased and honored to be here on behalf of Association for Farmers' Rights Defense, AFRD Georgia, as a network manager, Young Farmers Network Manager. I was able to participate in MAST International Program in US of University of Minnesota, and I got very a good experience and academic and working experience there, and I'm very happy for this chance to have an opportunity to bring young Georgian farmers' voices to GFFA 2023. When talking about transformation of food systems, first of all, we need to keep in mind that we need farmers. Unfortunately, more and more people in Georgia prefer moving from rural areas, moving to the cities. And our association is trying and works to attract them to rural areas by providing them training and academic programs. However, our capacities are limited, and we are looking for grants for our projects. We want to involve more professionals and researchers in Georgia and create innovations to minimize malnutrition and mitigate climate challenges. My family, which has a land near to the capital of Georgia, to Tbilisi, me with my husband and family, we are planning to create a greenhouse to serve as a study center of young farmers who are interested in greenhousing. The greenhouses there, we could grow like different plants and berries and fruits, and it can be used as a vertical farming model. We will do our best to share success stories of young farmers and share best business models for them to to build trust with the traditional and innovative knowledge. Thank you for this opportunity to meet and present our concept.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So, a young farmer from Georgia asking for funds. Not just that, of course, also showing a lot of initiative with a greenhouse. Jason, you run a family farm. What does that to you when you hear someone young from a different part of the world describing what she tries to achieve?
Good luck. But I think that you learn when you're growing up on a farm, when you're running the farm, you learn how things work. You learn how to think. You learn how to solve problems without money, because even though you want it, you don't always get it. And so you have to make both ends meet. And I think farmers themselves all over the world have learned how to use stranded assets, of how to, what do they have that they can actually take to market? But I think what we're up against now is something very different, where climate change is actually changing what farmers can do in every geography, and also how they need to do it. I love the idea that you're looking at greenhouses and vertical ag. We just funded a project to look at vertical ag and create a center of vertical ag excellence in the US, because we think that's part of the future. And growing undercover is part. It's not necessarily vertical, because you can grow a lot more things, even if it's hotter undercover sometimes than you can, certainly if it's colder. So we've heard how an individual is trying to solve these problems. The question is, where are the platforms? Where is the extension? Where are the other people to help them? Who do you call? And we can take a picture of any disease on your farm. Who do you send it to find out what it is? Who tells you what you can do to fix the problem? So can we change extension to be more electronic? Not people that are walking around farms that haven't been in university or farming for 20 or 30 years. They're out of date. We can have update multi-language centers where you can get information that you need right on the spot. Let's do that. Government should do that.
Right.
Producer groups should do that. I mean, these are things that are in the grasp. Yeah. We just need to be quicker and more at scale, because there are more people. They're consuming more, and more of them live in cities. So every farmer is being asked to produce more surplus to feed more people.
Are we, just top of my mind right now after that, are we a danger of losing enough farmers? I mean, she was also mentioning about, people moving to the city and abandoning farmland. How big a threat is that? And if it is a big threat, what's the incentive to bring them back, or to bring in new, fresh people who say, I'm going and do it? Esther, do you have experience? GFFA?
Yes.
Esther? Yeah?
Yes, we have that problem, and we have that challenge, because in our organization, it's a mixed organization of old women, old men, farmers, as well as young farmers, and they were just like compelled or forced, because they cannot go to the cities or elsewhere. So the challenge is how to attract them to agriculture, because if they will not farm, who will farm in the future? Right. So to attract them, they have to see, they said that they have to see that farming earns. Because if farming does not earn, they won't have any future, they have to go out. Okay? So what we do is show them that are successful cases already of farmers who earn, show them, and then challenge them. Okay, challenge them. Right now, in one of our agenda is attracting the youth to agriculture, and what we did through the help of partners like FAO, Forest and Farm Facility, is to organize them into young farmers committees within our bigger national apex organization, provide them training, business planning, or agroecology or climate resilient. We ask NGOs to help, and then with our small funds, provide some challenge funds for them and tell them where to look for help. Like there's a government program here, you can get the seedlings there, or you could start a backyard garden with this government fund. How to get this fund, we try to help them. But really, the coming together is very important, the solidarity. And what we find is that many young farmers use Facebook, at least in Asia, Facebook, and in that Facebook, they share experiences, photos, and some short stories of how they are doing it. And it helps. It helps build friendship, and it helps build knowledge and experience among the young farmers.
Right. I'm the bearer of bad news. We have 5 minutes left, and I have several cards of questions left, which I will have to skip. But luckily, this is the kick-off panel of 2 whole days of discussions, and obviously the GFFA ending with the Agriculture Minister round or conference on Saturday. So let me just ask you one final question, knowing that the discussion is going on, and we could just skip the surface or scratch slightly. What is it that you want everybody here to really focus on? What is the priority? What should be the end result of this forum? I know that is a big question, a tall order, but I'm sure you can live up to it. Josefa, I would like to start with you.
For me, I want this forum not to be just a forum of meetings, but a forum of action. Action, action, action. Implementation, implementation, implementation. That's what I want, because we know everything. So we want to pass from one stage, change the narrative. And we also want a political commitment, because we are going to have a panel of ministers tomorrow. Not only political will, but commitment on action. How the outcome of this forum is going to translate at the national level. That's what I expect from all the participants that are here. Because experience of COP27 shows us that COP is becoming a tourism.
Yeah.
I paid $2,000 for a room in Sharm el-Sheikh, and I didn't come out with anything. And this one is taxpayers. My country, my member state are paying the organization for us to do these jobs for them. Yeah. And we get there, we come out nothing. It's becoming more expensive than deliverable. So I want this forum here to be one of the forums. Tomorrow we say lesson learned. We sign this in, we are doing this in action, 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 and implementation, implementation, implementation.
Crystal clear. Thank you so much. Jason.
So I think there's a lot of focus on new technologies and new things that are coming. There's also a lot of focus on converting old infrastructure and technologies and stranded assets to new uses. I think there's a look for funding, et cetera. If I were going to focus on a single thing to make farming survive the climate change and thrive in it, where in some ways we have to swim faster to be treading water. Let's just be clear about it, because it's affecting productivity. 10 to 20% is the sense by 2030, 2035. To me, the thing to manage, the thing to measure, the thing to monitor, and I don't care what system you use, is soil organic matter, because that is the key to health. If you have organic matter, you use less water, you use less fertilizer, less fungicide, you have more moisture in the soil. It means you're doing right by keeping the soil covered. You can use agroforestry, you can use regen ag, any of these things do it, but manage it, monitor it, measure it, and make sure, because with climate change, it's going to volatilize a lot of that carbon very quickly with heat and dryness. So this is something to really work on.
Okay. Esther.
Yes. I agree, this should not just be a forum, but this should be with commitment and with action. But what is the direction of the action? I would really hope, we would really hope, that the direction of the commitment and action is on agroecology, regenerative agriculture, promoting the rights of farmers and peasants for lands, for example, for access and control over technologies, for markets, really putting farmers, women, men, young farmers, producers, herders, pastoralists, fishers, foresters at the heart and at the center of the food system. Work with them as partners, and empower their capacities so that they can be really very effective partners with you in extension, in research, in project design. Okay, so please, we hope that this will be placed in your communique this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Michael, you have the last word.
Human rights is the language of action, and the right to food provides the framework for implementation. I hope the communique clearly states a commitment to cooperate and coordinate multilaterally through the right to food.
Thank you. And a big thank you to all of you for this fantastic panel, because this brings us to the end of the panel. Time is up. Let me just briefly bring you up to speed what happens next, because the GFFA is just beginning. At 4 p.m. we start with the first expert panels. They're in parallel and they're open to the public. The high-level debate will also start at 4 p.m. It'll be streamed on the website, jointly hosted by the World Bank Group, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and the Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture. Innovation Lounge, or Forum and Lounge, don't forget that, the slides tomorrow, and of course parts of the Berlin Agriculture Ministers Conference on Saturday. The big highlight, the political highlight of this forum will also be partly open to the public. It'll be streamed on our website from 9 to 9:30 a.m. So you can certainly join with a cup of coffee. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Have an informative and fruitful, if I may say, GFFA 2023. Thank you so much.